Somebody said my head was too shiny, so today we're going with the hat. Everybody loves to talk about and glorify early retirement, and it can be an amazing thing. But what nobody talks about is what actually happens after you retire early. So this is the things you need to know about retiring early. So what is early retirement? In my world, most of the people I see retire are between the ages of 65 and 67. Main reason is because Medicare starts at 65 and right now full Social Security starts at 67. So early retirement technically is anything below that. But there are extremes. When I got into the FIRE movement, or financial independence, retire early, there was a man by the name of Mr. Money Mustache. He retired at the age of 30, which is wild. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be mostly talking to people who are under 60 years old. There's a lot of things you got to take into account during those ages. The main one being the rule that you can't pull out of retirement accounts, at least pre-tax retirement accounts, until you're 59 and a half. Which the first thing I will tell you is there is a small little exception to that a lot of people don't know. It's called the rule of 55. The rule of 55 states that if you retire from an employer and you're at least 55 years old, you can actually draw from your retirement plan from that employer without a 10% penalty, which is normally not possible. Now, it only counts for the employer's retirement plan. So if you have IRAs or you have old 401ks from different employers, that doesn't count. But it's one of the things I run into a lot, that people are 56, 57 and want to retire, but they're waiting because they don't want to pay that penalty. So just a helpful tidbit to keep in mind. But the appeal of early retirement, of course, it's pretty simple. You get more time. To me, time is the number one resource that we as humans probably take for granted. And isn't it amazing when you can buy yourself more time? One of the ways of doing that is early retirement. I went down the path of wanting to retire early in my 20s. That was the main draw to me. The idea that I no longer have a boss and my time is mine, not somebody else's. But there's a big gap between the dream of early retirement and the reality. The first thing to know about early retirement is I wouldn't really call it retirement. Really what you're doing is you're self-funding your life for decades. And you could easily say, wait a minute, that's what retirement is. Yes, but now we're talking about a lot longer time frame, 40, maybe even 50 years in the case of old Mr. Money Mustache, right? So what does that mean? Things like sequence of return risk hit extra hard. If you're not familiar, sequence of return risk is the idea that there is a market downturn in the first few years of your retirement. And if you're not properly prepared, you're having to sell investments that have gone down, thereby locking in the losses in order to fund your retirement. This is a huge deal. One of the biggest risks of retirement. You need to make sure your portfolio is structured to be able to withstand those things. It's a huge deal when you're 60. It's an even bigger deal when you're 40. You no longer have a paycheck, and guess what? Those mistakes, they compound hard. What I mean by that is, say you make a mistake, it costs you $5,000. Really, it's not a $5,000 mistake. It's a mistake of $5,000 compounded out for the next several decades, which adds up to a much larger number. So you got to be extra careful making sure you're avoiding those. And I hate to say it and bring down the party, but you're not just escaping work. You're taking on the biggest financial responsibility of your life. The next biggest thing I see in early retirement as far as an obstacle, it's healthcare. When you're under 65 and you don't have Medicare, things get a little bit more difficult, maybe a little more complex, we'll say. You're probably going to have private health insurance, unless, of course, you have a spouse that's still working. That's a great situation. But if neither you or a spouse are working or you don't have a spouse, you're going to have to get private health insurance. Most of the time, people get this through the healthcare.gov marketplace. There's a lot of variability in here. Most of it has to do with your income. The cost of private health insurance nowadays, as started by the Affordable Care Act, a lot of it is based on what your income is. And it's a percentage of the poverty level that decides how much of a subsidy you may or may not get. So the best thing to do, honestly, is to talk to someone who does this as a profession. There's several people I know of. This is all they do. They do private health insurance and Medicare. I would talk to one of them. Most likely they're not going to charge you. You can get some great information and at least have them help you get into a plan that's right for you, both from a cost perspective as well as a coverage perspective. Healthcare isn't just an expense. It's a variable you really can't control. The next thing about early retirement is the 4% rule. The thing I will say about the 4% rule is it's not a guarantee. People take the 4% rule and they run with it and they think, life is going to be grand. I'm only pulling out 4% per year. Just to give a quick background, the 4% rule comes from something called the Trinity study. It It was essentially professors from Trinity College who got together in the late 90s and were trying to figure out, using all the data points they could, if you have a properly structured portfolio, approximately how much could you pull out per year and have a successful retirement. What they came up with is 4%. There's an extremely high probability, something like 98%, that portfolio will last 30 years based on past market conditions. Now, what did I just say? Past market conditions. Nothing about the future. Nobody knows what the future is going to hold. And so that, to me, is one of the biggest reasons why to take the 4% rule with a grain of salt. And just understand that in retirement, you're going to have to be flexible. That's the nature of financial planning and finance in general. You have to evolve with the times. My job is different than it was a year ago. So are markets, so are tax laws. Plans need to evolve with it. Things that the 4% rule doesn't take into account: market timing, tax laws changes. A longer retirement in general just means more variability, right? When you've got more years, there's more things that can happen. It's really that simple. The way I would phrase it is, the 4% rule works until it doesn't. So make sure you can remain flexible, which goes right into my next point. And I already mentioned it, so I'll be brief about it, but you've got to be flexible in these plans. Times change, you've got to change with it. Don't just set it and forget it. Your financial health is not something you just want to walk away from and say, it's good enough. The biggest thing I think is going to likely shift is your spending. The first few years of retirement, I refer to them as the bucket list years. I see people going out, a lot of times traveling, sometimes buying a new car, all these things they've waited for retirement to do. Make sure that's included in your plan, and going back to the sequence of return risk, making sure you're taking that into account. Markets are always going to surprise you. It's just how it works. It's the exciting part of investing, but it's also the part that keeps you up at night. 2008, yeah, there was a few people that saw it coming, but almost nobody. Nobody thought the housing market, of all things, was going to collapse. And then, of course, the other biggest one in my lifetime would be 2020. COVID. Nobody saw that coming. I can remember reading about it in the news, oh yeah, but nobody thought it was going to shut down the world as long as it did. Remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? We saw how that worked out. Precipitous drops in the market, followed by a ridiculous and quick rebound. Your plan's got to be flexible. You have to be flexible, just like markets are flexible. The best retirement plans aren't rigid. They adapt. I think adaptability is underrated. The last thing I'll mention about early retirement is you might not be done working, quote unquote, as much as you think you are. I have a different video out there that we'll link in the description that talks about this, but there are 3 buckets I think we as humans, but especially retirees, need to fill up. Their purpose, joy, and a sense of community. A lot of times when you leave your job, you definitely lose your purpose, and a lot of times you lose your sense of community because your social network is directly tied with your coworkers, because you probably spend more time with your coworkers than even your family. So make sure you're filling up your buckets. And if you're not, it's okay to go back to work. Plans change, times change. You might have to go back to work. You might start to run low on money. We just don't know what's going to happen. So I think that flexibility is key, to always leave that option open. Boredom is real. I see it all the time. For some reason, it's that 6 to 9 months after retirement mark, especially with people that were forced into retirement via layoffs and things like that. They come to me, I always ask them how they're doing. There's a lot of them that aren't doing that great. They've lost that drive, what makes life exciting. And that's just what I talked about: purpose, joy, and sense of community. I think the main way to summarize that point is a lot of people retire from something, but you should be retiring into something as well. I'm no stranger to early retirement. In my early 20s, my goal was to retire at 45. But then my work and job situation changed. I started doing this, and I love what I do. I don't foresee a day where I will stop working. So just like my life's changed in the last 15 or so years, yours likely could too. But if the idea of early retirement, even just financial freedom, appeals to you, keep these things in mind. I really hope they help. Because the goal isn't to retire as early as possible. The goal should be to retire as securely as possible.